So I'd like to welcome Josh Smith and Rob Gash from Hertz.
Hey, Mo, how are you doing?
Excellent. Hi, Rob. Hi, Josh.
Yeah,
How are you
hey, good
doing?
morning, Mo. Thanks for having us.
Great to have you guys. And we're kind of moving quickly through the agenda, which is really, really good. Um, First of all, huge welcome. Really interesting conversation we heard. Just give us a quick bio on each of you before we dig in. So, Josh, go first.
Sure. So, Josh Smith, I lead product and technology at a company called Spreetail. We're basically a merchant of record or seller on some of the largest marketplaces globally, as well as a service provider, leveraging our large and fast logistics network, where we can do things like deliver prime steaks from Omaha Steaks, next day delivery to 90% of the US.
Okay, well, my son loves steaks, so I think he will be on my phone this evening ordering some of those steaks. So, Rob, over to you.
Yeah, I'm Robert Gash. I run the e-commerce business here inside of Hearst Magazines. But basically, you could think of our role as making everything you're inspired by in a magazine or in any of the content we publish easier to shop. So kind of similar to Farhan's messaging around how do we shorten the distance between buyers and sellers. We're a key source that people use for research and investigation and education. And we know we have a big role in helping people make a decision. But it's often been a lot of work, and our job is to build the infrastructure and the platforms to make that easier.
No, exactly. No, that's super interesting. And I know you and I've spent a whole bunch of time together, and it's really interesting, hearing that evolution as well. So with that, I'd kind of love to dive in and ask each of you, what do you think is possible in the world of AI? So both of you are, at the end of the day, enabling people to sell or selling things yourself, and that's always a uphill battle, and making it easy for buyers to find products is key. So Rob, why don't you go first? What are you guys doing in that world as it relates to AI and commerce? What do you think is possible? And we'll dig into kind of what you guys are doing later. Sorry. So what are you doing? What do you think about it?
I can share maybe some of the dreams we've had so far, but I think there's still,
Yes.
to the points made earlier, a lot we're learning about what it could be. But our world's a little unique because we come from a world of content. So we've got all of this research data from our bench scientists, from our journalists out in the field. Some of that makes it into published articles that we all know and read, but a lot of it doesn't. And so one of the things that we're looking at on the AI front is how do we bring all of that knowledge and expertise to bear when you have a problem you're trying to solve, right? And search, I think, is kind of one of the most interesting short-term domains for AI here, because these large models have really basically made it really easy to upskill your team without having to hire a giant bench of research scientists to build a search engine, right? One of the things that I think is classically undersold in the market is keeping search relevancy high takes a lot of work. And a lot of us are not funded. Our CEOs don't think of funding this. They think, oh, we're going to launch the new search engine. It'll just be great forever. Wrong. As categories change, as data changes. But these large language models have been candidly quite powerful at recommendations and just making search more accessible to people who don't have those big budgets. But I think of that search as also searching our expertise. To Farhan's point of like the stuff you can't find in the Shopify admin panel, what are all the things I know about that car that didn't make it into the final article, or buried on the third article as a glancing reference that you might want to know, but you would never take enough time to go find it? So that's one thing that we're really bullish on here. And it goes both ways. It's how do we mine all of that data we know that you don't see, and make it more accessible. It's also how do we increase information density. I think all of us have kind of seen the like too long didn't read, the kind of F shape of how folks read articles. So how do we get you into the research process faster is something we're really bullish on with AI without having to have people try to build all the different permutations of it. And similarly, I want to bring some of those little tidbits and snippets into the commerce experience. When you're lower in the funnel, you've made some decisions or you're really narrowing it down. How do I have, little versions of all of my editors talking about why that brand is cool, right? If we've covered it from 5 different perspectives, you should have those alongside user reviews and all the other stuff we're used to in a commerce world. We have the ability to do that, but I don't have the budget or the human scale to do it manually the way it's kind of been approached before. And that's where I'm really bullish seeing AI internally.
Wow. Okay. So bring that wealth of knowledge, information, expertise experts into the buying process, which is kind of a very different way of thinking about it. Josh, so you guys, Amazon, you guys are selling or kind of intermingled profusely. What do you think about AI and what it can do within the retail and the online world?
Yeah, I mean, generative AI has obviously become pretty synonymous with AI as a whole, and we've already moved beyond kind of the simple question of who's using it versus and into a competition of whose solutions are more effective, right? 2 years ago, like this was kind of on the edge. Well, now it's pretty pervasive, as far Brian basically talked about. I'm excited about that fact, right? Because when it's applied thoughtfully, like it can unlock a lot of value. As far as the different domains of where generative AI has been applied, I agree with Brian that like where I think the biggest shift is going to occur is in conversational commerce or visual commerce. There's a cool video by Google that they released recently where they showed someone using their camera and like looking at a product, and I forgot what it was, but it was broken, right? And all of a sudden you could click and buy a replacement for that, even though it was a really odd or like rare item that was like hard to identify. It automatically searched through their index where they could buy that product again. So things where it's blending the visual and the shopping experience and utilizing things like our cameras to help with that, I think is going to be really unique and evolve how we kind of think, and even in the in-store experience. But I mentioned earlier, like Gen AI has proven to be evolutionary in how brands and retailers get support to do their work. And help us as we kind of go do our shopping experience. I really believe that there's more of a revolutionary change around the corner coming from other types of AI. A good example is intelligence models like causal AI, where we're able to determine the actual causal impact, not just the correlation between things like promotions and incremental conversions. I think is going to drive an accelerated competition around how the brands and our retailers are thinking about how they bring this to the fold in their own business management.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's super interesting. Okay, let's dig in a little bit and kind of into what you guys are actually doing with AI today. So those are the plethora of things that are possible. And Josh, we're gonna touch upon kind of some of the things you said as we dig further. But let me start with Rob. So Rob, great possibilities. Not as much budget needed to make it happen. What are you doing today to move the needle?
One that we launched, it was almost a year ago, kind of crazy to say, but was in events, things to do. You think about our newspapers, our TV stations, they have a lot of unique expertise. But when you're looking at, a new venue you've never been to, what do you need to know? Is it easy to park? Is it a good thing for families to do? And we've all seen this in a bunch of different ways. You get the little pills of all the tags that you might see on some location kind of oriented sites. We were really impressed by its ability to help one editor cover a metro market a lot faster. So when you go to that venue, is it good for kids? Is it noisy? Is it going to be hard to park? And that's data that you could put together manually, but covering the hundreds of locations we would need to cover took too long for us to keep up with the kind of pace of change in restaurants and venues. And we had a single editor who was able to cover 5 massive metro areas in a matter of a week or two, which would have taken them quarters before. And again, this is basically just helping them synthesize facts we already know or have access to in data sources. And that was actually the first use of public-facing kind of LLM-aided content at the company. So that was one like real example that we are now looking to bring into things like product details, to bring into the deeper product reviews, mining both structured and unstructured data together to give you more of those snippets around the brand, around this particular product, or maybe it's this style. You could imagine, is it trending, is it not? That's hugely important to our fashion titles. So that's where we're taking those early learnings. And then to Farhan's comments, I fully agree on the software needs to get out of the way, right? And how does software help you do the job that you really think you need to do? And I often have a talk with people like, go to your customer and listen to what they say is their top priority. It never involves the software, period. Like the software is an enabler, unless you're a sales guy. If there's any sales folks on the team here, they're selling software, fine, your world's different. But that's where we've been finding it helpful in terms of like filtering through assortment. We talk about thousands of products and thousands of brands. Some of them are just glancing references that aren't meaningful. And then we have this challenge of what are we missing? So from an assortment analysis perspective, I was really impressed at how far some of those models got when we were looking at our strategic plan and took the work that would take merchandisers potentially weeks to go do. We could get to relatively high quality answers pretty quickly. These are things where you don't need precision, so it doesn't have to know the math, but it needs to be like reasonably good at, oh, these are the categories, these are the price points, these are the things that are most adjacent to the content you're looking at. And it's been really helpful in us, using it to kind of filter all the things we cover for the ones that matter the most.
That's super interesting. It's really interesting here listening to you touch upon this concept of using AI to figure out what people are interested in, right? Because that's something normally, when we've been thinking about it, we've been thinking about like, how do you service the demand that's coming in? And of course, your point in that discussion was also, how do you figure out where that demand actually is, and then use that to gel what you put out?
I mean, look, AI is a reflection of everything that's on the internet. It doesn't always predict things well, but history repeats itself more often than most of us like to admit. And it understands a lot of those kind of connections in a way that you can just, get to a pretty good answer really quickly, and then spend your time refining that and maybe fine tuning it versus having to do all of the original research.
Perfect. No, that makes a huge amount of sense. So Josh, in your world, what impact are you seeing today in terms of how people buy things and how you guys are gearing up to make sure they have the right products there to buy?
Yeah, I mean, we've obviously released our own tooling that takes advantage of this. Obviously, there's a lot of people are rushing towards kind of content automation, but I think we're approaching it a little bit different than most folks. Basically, because of the automation bias that a lot of brand executives in today's economic environment have, and the fact that LLMs are developed to like generalize this knowledge, as Brian was just talking about, that like I do believe the use of automation at scale is going to start creating this natural regression to the mean. Because like Farhan even mentioned earlier that like all the commerce platforms have to think to maximize adoption for like value for the masses, that if we all rely on that same foundational model, even if we work to customize them, we're still likely creating very similar results. Just like search engines generally provide the same search rank for each query with only slight variations for personalized results, right? So as we see a lot of companies that are like leveraging Gen AI, we kind of view it a little different where instead of replacing, the folks and automating completely, we're really diving in and having our experts doing a lot of testing based on what AI is covering, and then figuring out the real needle movers and the real causal impacts of those suggestions to then go back and encode that in our automation capabilities. And the Gen AI capabilities are just slightly automated, but still heavily reviewed for this like human on the loop interaction.
Okay, that's interesting. And you and I discussed kind of that slightly different way of looking at the world. I think, look, generally when you get new technology or new platforms, there's always this concept, at least we like to think of first mover advantage. But as you said, and there was one of the discussions, I listened to an interview with Mark Benioff, and one of the things he said, which is I've been thinking too, which, AI becomes a necessary part of everything we do. So of course, if it does, then how are things different? Right? Because everybody has to have it, right? But of course, in the meantime, there's a lot of opportunity and people can do great things. So I guess with that, I'd love to kind of talk a little bit in terms of some of the tangible things that each of you are doing. Rob touched upon, at least how some of your editors are using it. So Josh, what tangible results are you seeing in terms of like things that people can say, oh, I get that. That's like real improvement.
Yeah. Going back to content optimization, right? That process I just talked about where we're using AI to mine kind of the broader kind of trends, introduce keywords, really testing those keywords with A/B causal inference experts, and then embedding that into our ecosystem for then scaled automation. That tool Listing Doctor helped one of our partners, ChargePoint, which is like an at-home EV charging provider, right? So imagine a car and you need charging at home. We increased their sales by 12%, right? Just in a matter of 3 months, and increased their conversions by over 23%. As well as improve their overall bestseller rank by 71%, right? Just by this, like introducing this process. But what we saw, if we just relied on Gen AI itself, we had very little change. to those metrics. So it was actually the experts and that depth of process that created that incremental lift, less so the Gen AI itself.
Well, that kind of leads nicely into Rob, some of the things that you were sharing earlier. So any results you'd like to touch upon today, just in terms of data and things you want to do this next year that you think will have good results?
I can probably add the most on the next year because I covered a lot of the things we're seeing on the productivity front so far. And those numbers are interesting to us, but let's just say it's meaningful. I talked about the ability to cover basic details on events in days, not months or quarters, and that's real, and we think that scales. But for me, the next one is really kind of closer to where Farhan was earlier, is really on the consumer side. What do we need to do to really kind of unlock vastly simpler ways to access all of our expertise? So our newspapers group actually had a lot of press around their kind of Kamala chatbot that they built around all the coverage the San Francisco Chronicle had leading up to the election. You're not going to go read those hundreds of articles, but we have a lot of information about her history there. And that was, I think, a really clever use of it. We're looking at the same thing in some of the other areas that are commerce adjacent. So we also oversee our automotive sector as part of consumer commerce. And there's a lot of research that we all put into buying a car. And most of it is in industry code word, and often conflicting marketing terms from different OEMs. And you ultimately have to make a decision. You're trying to figure out, do I want that version of traction control? Does the third row exist as an option? And that's not easy data to get to. And so that's really where we're leaning heavily into the investigation in 25, is making that sort of interrogation possible on as many of our brands as we can. So you'll see a version of it kind of running on Good Housekeeping, very limited because we don't have the catalog data we need behind it yet, but it kind of shows some of the ambition there. Automotive is up next. That's one we're really bullish on. And there's a bunch of other things in the fashion world that'll follow.
I think that sounds super interesting. I mean, we're in the process of kind of trying to design, or the end stages of designing the interior of a house. But I imagine going to Good Housekeeping and say like, hey, here's like the architectural drawings to my house. Here's the color scheme. Can you start recommending stuff to me? And this is the
Here
stuff
are the things I like. Go search the image archive from Veranda and bring some cool trends and kind of design to the forefront. That's where AI right now is so powerful, because it doesn't need to be an exact answer. While there's a world where it can get the math right, no stylist ever gets every product recommendation for you, right? There's some stuff you're like, what the hell are you thinking? And that's actually space where I think LLMs can be really promising, because you can get close and inspire.
Excellent, for sure. So I guess kind of coming up, what is the future of shopping as it relates to search and discovery and the buying process? So Josh, you go first. What do you think? How do you think the shopping experience will change?
Yeah, I think you're going to see a lot of gimmickry like experimentation by some of the bigger retailers, trying to just see what works and what doesn't. But I do think, like we're talking about earlier, conversational commerce is the most likely to have a larger impact. Like imagine being able to have a conversation through email and then actually being able to close a sale or close a transaction through email versus on platform, going to a Shopify store, right? So I think that's going to be more pervasive on the shopper experience. And like I mentioned earlier too, I think from an operations business perspective, you're likely to see more true change happening when it comes to not just LLM support, but different types of AI changing how we make actual decisions versus just being a support agent into the ecosystem.
Perfect. Rob, what do you think?
I mean, I'll keep it short. I think it's really the ability to focus on the things you want to research and simplify purchasing and researching the stuff that you don't, right? None of us want to buy products that don't last or are potentially dangerous. Our price points all differ, our needs differ. And there's a lot of work today that consumers have to put into finding that stuff, right? I mean, Josh knows if you're on any of the big marketplaces, Amazon included, you are overwhelmed with brands you've never heard of that are some random paste of letters behind their name. Some of them are actually good, but how do you know, right? And unfortunately, we can't test all of them because they're just showing up too quickly. And so I think there's a real opportunity for AI and kind of an agentic world to really do some of that work for you. Be like, look, here are the needs I have, but I have a time budget of 10 minutes. Give me everything I need to know about making this decision in 10 minutes, or maybe just make it for me because I really don't care. And then you can focus your effort on the things that do matter, like a car. You don't want to mess that up. That's where AI will assist, but I don't think it's anywhere near making the call for you. Because financing and service and all sorts of other stuff come into play. That's just a lot of context. The more we can bias our time to the things we want to spend our time geeking out about, I think the happier we all are. And I think that's the logical endpoint for a lot of these commerce discussions is get the commodity stuff off my radar so I don't have to spend 10 minutes filtering through the best dog bowl. I just want one that the dog can't destroy, and give me 3 options so I can pick the color. That I think is going to be a big step forward.
Perfect. Loving enabling people to spend time and doing research on stuff they actually care about, not the dog bowls. So 30 seconds. One piece of advice for the audience out there in terms of AI in commerce and what they should be thinking about in 25.
I'd say I jump in and say
Josh, go
experiment.
first.
Yeah. Start with small, clear objectives before moving to the bigger investments. Right. If you can't get payback period within a short period of time, like as little as 6 months, then you're approaching the problem wrong. Experiment and iterate.
Yeah, fully aligned with Josh. I mean, pick a real problem. Don't just dream dreams and talk about how it can generate all these things. I mean, that's fun to do in terms of like push your thinking, but pick a problem you have today that you'd rather not do, dog bowls, whatever it is, and start using AI to try to solve it. Because to the points made earlier, it has always surprised me how far it can get with relatively esoteric tasks like that merchandising question. We had no idea if it would work, but we spent an hour or two playing with it, and the results it was coming up with almost exactly matched our own. And that's something that I think you've got to really think through and pick the small wins first.
That's amazing. And I love that concept of getting it to do work for you because it touches upon kind of also what Farhan shared and what Brian shared earlier. So with that, huge thanks to both of you. Thank you so much for carving up time. It's a really busy time. I'm sure the audience finds the conversation and will find the conversation because it'll be recorded very valuable. Huge thanks.